The next morning, he woke up at 6:30. He hopped in the shower, got dressed, and drank a cup of coffee. He had a lot of work to do today. He grabbed his laptop and a thumb drive with the previous day's videos, and before turning on the cameras, he scribbled a note to Nancy, letting her know he needed an early start to his workday. He didn't say anything about Mark's death. Driving, he called Lisa. "Hey, sis," he said. "Mind if I come over and make us breakfast?" "Well, okay," she replied. "Are you feeling better this morning?" "Yeah, a little," he said. "I got a lot of sleep last night, and that helped." "Good," she said. "Okay, I'll see you in a few minutes." A few minutes later, Lisa let Ron into her apartment. She led him into the kitchen, and he began breaking eggs to make an omelet. "Are you sure you can handle this?" she asked. "Oh, yes," he replied. "I'll make coffee," she said. "Sounds good to me," he told her. "So what is it?" asked Lisa, as Ron straightened up the omelet. "I want you to watch something," Ron said, pulling out his laptop and a flash drive. Plugging in his headphones, he held them out to Lisa. "Watch this," he told her, starting up the video. Her eyes widened as she watched Nancy with the three men. When it was over, she took off her headphones and wiped the tears from her eyes. "Oh my God," she said. "I can't believe they could do that to you. Do you think Dad might have had something to do with Grandpa getting shot?" "I thought so at first, but when I looked at the timeline of events, it just didn't fit," he said. "He just didn't have enough time to set it up." "I heard you had a little fight with them in the parking lot," she said. "Yeah, a little," Ron said. "Is Daddy going to be able to handle Grandpa's funeral?" She nodded her head. "He said he would," she told him. Ron stared at his sister for a couple minutes before he spoke. "I need to know the truth, Lisa," he said. "The whole truth." "About what?" she asked. "What happened that made you leave home?" he asked. "Were you molested?" Her eyes began to water, and her face reddened. She nodded her head slowly, unable to look Ron in the face. "You can tell me. I'll be right here." She began to sob uncontrollably. Ron put his arm around her head and let her cry on his shoulder. He let her spill it out of herself. Finally, she sat up and looked at him. "Remember how we all used to have scuffles in the basement?" she asked. "Yeah," he answered. "I always ended up at the bottom of the heap." She laughed. "Well, after you left, I ended up at the bottom of the heap," she said. "The first time it happened was about a year after you left. The boys and I were in the basement, and we were just goofing around like we always do. Mom and Dad weren't home that night, and the boys bought some beer. They gave me one, and the next thing I knew I felt weird, like I wanted it. But at the same time, I hated it. I realized later that I had been drugged." "And how many times did that happen after that?" asked Ron. "Quite often. I'd say once every 2 weeks for about a year and a half," she said. I was so embarrassed. "Damn. Why didn't you just say no?" he asked. "I did at first, but John said he had pictures and videos and threatened to tell everyone," she said. "They also threatened to hurt me if I went to the police." "Did Mom know about this?" asked Ron. She shook her head. "No. She knew about the other girls, but not that," she said. "She was always out of the house when it was going on." "My God, Lisa, that's awful," Ron said. "I'm not up to date on all the laws, but I think you should talk to someone. You might have a criminal record." "You think anyone would care after all these years?" she asked. "I'm going to make an appointment with a lawyer today, so I'll ask about it," Ron said. "I thought I saw somewhere that there's no statute of limitations for crimes like that in this state, but I don't follow the law. And yes, it was a felony." "So you're going to divorce Nancy?" asked Lisa. "Yes," he said. "There's no way I can live with that." "Good," she said. "I'm so sorry for you, Ron. Believe me, there are plenty of girls who would kill to have a man like you, and they're not all whores." Ron smiled and hugged his sister. "Well, I have a lot to do today, so I should get going," he said. "Call me if you need anything, and I'll let you know what I find out, okay?" "Sounds like a plan," she said. Thanks for coming over, Ron. And thanks for making me breakfast. I may ask you to do it again. Ron smiled and kissed her cheek. Anytime, he said. At that moment, Ron's cell phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but he answered it anyway. Ron Black, he said. Mr. Black, this is Marcus Billingham, your grandfather's attorney, the man on the other end of the line said. Is this a good time to talk? Yes, it is, Ron said. What can I do for you? I received word that your grandfather passed away yesterday, Marcus said. First of all, I'd like to offer my condolences. He and I were friends for a long time. Thank you, Mr. Billingham, Ron said. Please call me Marcus, he said. Secondly, I was wondering if you and your sister could come by my office this morning. I need to discuss your grandfather's last will with you. Is that possible? Well, I can stop by, Ron said. Let me ask Lisa. She's here. He hung up the phone and looked at his sister. Can you take the day off today and come see Grandpa's lawyer? I think so, she said. We're getting 3 days of bereavement leave, so I don't think that will be a problem. Let me make the call first. She pulled out her phone and called her boss to explain the situation. In less than a minute, she ended the call and looked at Ron. No problem, she said. I can be there. Ron put her on speakerphone. Marcus, I put you on speakerphone, Ron said. Lisa said she could come with me. What time should we be there? Can you be there by 10 in the morning? He asked. Lisa nodded her head. We'll be there, Ron said. Okay, Marcus said. I'll see you at 10 o'clock. After Marcus gave his address, they ended their conversation and Lisa ran to her bedroom to get ready. Soon they were on their way to Marcus's office downtown. Ron found a spot in the main parking lot downtown, and they walked 2 blocks to the high-rise where Marcus's office was located. The receptionist took down their names and ushered them into Marcus's inner sanctum. Come in, please, Marcus said when the receptionist opened the door. He shook their hands and offered them a cup of coffee, which they graciously accepted. Marcus ordered 3 cups to be brought and then invited them to sit down. You're probably wondering why I called you both here today, he said. I'm a little curious, Ron replied, especially since I was going to seek family law counseling. Do you want a divorce? Asked Marcus. Ron nodded his head. Yes, he said. Well, then we can kill 2 birds with 1 stone, said Marcus. I happen to be the one who drew up the prenup for you and Nancy at your grandfather's request. I hope you don't mind, but he mentioned to me before he was shot that you could call on our services. We'll get back to that. In fact, I wanted to discuss with you two some very important changes to your grandfather's will. Oh, asked Ron. And what are those changes? About 8 months ago, your grandfather basically cut your father and your brothers out of his will, said Marcus. He left the 3 of them a total of $1 each. Your father was originally the executor of the will, but he changed that. You, Ron, have been appointed executor. His entire estate has been placed in a trust, and you two have been appointed administrators with equal powers. Ron and Lisa looked at each other in shock. This was the first time they had heard of any changes, and Mark had never mentioned their father and brothers being denied such a large portion of the inheritance. Under normal circumstances, it wouldn't be that big of a deal, but your grandfather's fortune is quite large, Marcus said. Maybe not like Bill Gates, but very substantial. Even with my fees and his recent expenses, you'll both be provided for life. I can handle the probate court if you want, but you'll still be responsible for any final decisions that need to be made. Don't worry about my fees. I've already arranged that with your grandfather, and they will be paid out of the inheritance. Do you think our father might contest that? Asked Ron. Marcus nodded his head. I'd be surprised if he didn't, said Marcus. Well, Grandpa trusted you for a long time, said Ron. So I don't mind you handling the probate stuff. Is that okay with you, Lisa? Asked Ron. She nodded her head. Yes, of course, she said. Good. Just so you know, there are 4 properties in the trust, said Marcus. Your grandfather's house, the house you and Nancy and Ron live in, the house your parents live in now, and the lakefront property. Wait a minute, Ron said. The house Mom and Dad live in is part of the trust? I thought Grandpa held a promissory note on it. No, Marcus said. He bought the mortgage a few years ago when your dad lost his job. There's no debt on it. He let your parents and brothers live in the house for minimal rent. If you have the desire, you can extend that agreement to them as well. It's up to you. What's this lakefront property? Asked Ron. I didn't know anything about it. Well, your grandfather talked about using it as a summer vacation home, said Marcus. He started building it a few months ago, but hasn't finished it yet. Maybe you two can cooperate and make it a family home. They discussed the terms of Marcus's will for about another half hour before the conversation turned to Ron and Lisa. Marcus, Ron began, we'd like your opinion on something. He turned to his sister. Would you like to tell him? Lisa nodded her head before telling Marcus what she had shared with her brother earlier. She was clearly embarrassed, and Ron felt himself getting angrier by the minute. Marcus listened in silence, taking notes as she told him. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and thought for a few moments before he spoke. Well, Lisa, he began, there's no statute of limitations in this state for what you've just described. The only stumbling block, it seems to me, would be providing evidence. You say they claim to have a videotape? She nodded her head. Yes, that's exactly what they told me, she said. He nodded his head. Good, he said. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to call the district attorney and see what he has to say. He or someone in his office might want to discuss this with you before taking any action. Would that be okay with you? Yes, she said. I want them to pay for what they've done. Are you saying your mother didn't know anything about this? He asked. Not that I know of, Lisa replied. Good, he said. I can't promise anything, but I'll talk to the district attorney and we'll go ahead, okay? Thank you, she said. Marcus turned to Ron, who pulled a flash drive out of his pocket. What about you? Asked Marcus. Ron held out the flash drive to him. I want a divorce, said Ron. There's a video on this flash drive of her with my dad and my two brothers. It's pretty graphic. Grandpa also hired a private investigator, and we're going to meet with him next time. Marcus inserted the flash drive into the computer and started the video. His face turned slightly red as he watched the video. When it ended, he pulled out the disc. Mind if I hang out with him for a while? He asked Ron. Not at all, Ron replied. Good. I'll also mention it to the DA if you don't mind, Marcus said. I'll start the prenuptial agreement paperwork immediately and send her to court. When do you plan to meet with her about it? Tonight when she gets home from school, Ron said. Good, he said. I can tell you, based on this, it's going to be just fine. Adultery is still grounds for divorce in this state and can be prosecuted as a felony, but I don't know of any recent cases where that's happened. As I recall, your agreement states that in the event of adultery, the guilty spouse leaves the marriage without any support. Your house is actually owned by your grandfather's trust, so she has no right to it. Does she work? No, she's a full-time student, Ron said. I was planning on renting an apartment for her, so she'd have a place to live until she graduates from college. I've already paid her tuition for the rest of the program. According to the agreement, she will receive $2,500 for each year of our marriage, plus the money she had when we got married, which is only $450. I will give her a check for that amount tonight. She has her own car, so she can keep it. I see, Marcus said. You're very generous under the circumstances. I hate what she did, but I don't want to see her on the street, Ron said. That's good to hear, Marcus said. Good. I'll get the paperwork ready. I'll also get a restraining order against her and her 3 amigos. Make sure I have her new address so I can serve it. If you get additional evidence, make sure I have that as well. If she doesn't contest the divorce, it should be final in 6 months. Thank you, Ron said. How much do I need for a down payment? Don't worry about that now, Marcus said. I'll send you an invoice. Besides, your grandfather has already given me a pretty hefty fee, so I'll dispense with it for now. Marcus handed each of them a business card and then stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. Ron and Lisa stood up as well, and all three shook hands. I'm really sorry about this, Marcus said. Your grandfather had the best opinion of you. He always said he hoped the family would reconcile. If you need anything, please call anytime. I will discuss all of this with the district attorney and let you know what I find out. Your contact information is already in my files. Thank you, Marcus, Ron said. The next stop was the office of Alfred Johnson, the private investigator Marcus had hired to wire the house and spy on Nancy. After talking to the receptionist, a redhead chewing gum, they were ushered into Alfred's office. A middle-aged man with a cigar, looking like Columbo, rose from his chair and greeted them. Please call me Al, he said, after all the introductions. Yes, I've spoken to your grandfather, and we're looking after your wife. Quite a busy lady, to say the least. I haven't finished my report yet, but I have a lot of pictures and video footage. What did you find out? Asked Ron. As you suspected, your wife has had fun with several men in the last 24 hours alone, said Al. In total, I'd say she's had at least 15 men, not counting your father and 2 brothers. 15? Asked Ron, shocked. The shit was definitely about to hit the fan. Yeah, said Al. He pulled a folder out of the manila and held it out to Ron. The folder was full of pictures and DVDs. This is just from when we started this case. I can tell you that your father and brother were also at your house this morning. They showed up around 8:30 or so and left around 10 o'clock. We have a videotape of that too. It's on the DVD. I must warn you that it is very disturbing and quite graphic. Ron did some quick math. If they left at 10 o'clock, the events should start around 3 p.m. Thank you, Ron said. I think we have enough evidence for a divorce. I've already started the process, so if you'd like, I think after tonight we can consider the case done. Well, okay, Al said. I'll have my boys watch her until this evening, and then we'll finish the surveillance. I can have a full report for you in about 3 days, if that's satisfactory to you. Satisfactory, Ron said. How much do I owe you? I'll find out when we're all done and send you an invoice for payment, Al said. Your grandfather already paid for a whole week of surveillance, so you'll probably get a refund. My grandfather was shot yesterday, Ron said, so any refund can be directed to me. I'm sorry to hear about that, Al said. Damn it. I thought only good things about Mark. He helped me get started, you know. Well, as soon as we're done, I'll figure it out and get back to you, okay? Okay, Ron said, holding out a card with his contact information to Al. We'll be in touch, Al said before they left. And let me know when you're going to have the funeral. I'd like to pay my last respects. Afterward, Ron and Lisa went to lunch and talked about what had happened that morning. I knew Grandpa had a lot of money, but I didn't realize he was so well off, Lisa said. Neither did I, Ron said. My head is still spinning. So, what's on your agenda? Asked Lisa. I saw on the internet that the complex where you live has small furnished studio apartments for rent, said Ron. I'd like to rent one of those for Nancy. That is, if you don't mind her living in the same complex as you. No, I don't mind, she said. You really do, don't you? She asked after a few moments. You're really kicking her to the curb. Yes, Ron said. I don't trust her anymore, and all the love I had for her is pretty much gone. You've changed, Ron, she said. Very much so. What happened to you? Well, that Ron guy is gone, he said. And the days of putting up with shit from people are gone too. He realized she was more right than he'd ever guessed. The old Ron would never have done to Nancy what he'd done. And even if he had, or even thought about it, he would have been racked with guilt. The new Ron, however, felt absolutely no remorse. Nor did he feel any guilt for what he knew would happen to his father and brothers. Moreover, the former Ron would probably have cowered in a corner to realize that his marriage was ruined. He might even have begged Nancy to come back to him and let her turn him into one of those weak cuckolds he'd read about on the internet. But that Ron no longer existed. Something else had replaced him. He had to be careful, though, and he knew it. If pushed too hard, he could easily turn into a modern version of Stevenson's Edward Hyde. I like this new Ron, Lisa said with a smile. Ron smiled back. Thanks, he said. Me too. So, what do you think we should do about Mom? She asked. If Dad and the boys end up in jail, she'll have no income at all. Even if they don't go to jail, there's still the issue of the house. Are you thinking of kicking them out? It's tempting, he said. They've certainly given me plenty of reasons to throw them out on the street. But I don't want Mom to get hurt. Although I don't mind her staying if they go to jail. We'll see how things work out, okay? Okay, she said. You wouldn't mind setting up a small trust fund for her so she can survive? No, I wouldn't mind, he said. Grandpa would probably do the same thing. I guess you're right, she said. After eating, they returned to Lisa's apartment and headed for the office. Lisa introduced Ron to the office manager and explained the situation. So, you want to rent a studio apartment for your soon-to-be ex-wife? Marcia, the office manager, asked. Yes, replied Ron, and I'm willing to pay 6 months' rent in advance if possible. 6 months? Asked Marcia. You're very generous. Yes, we can do that if you'd like. I have one furnished studio just now, if that would suit you. Will do, Ron said. Marcia led them into the apartment so they could look it over. It was very small but clean and with minimal furniture. Considering that Nancy was at school all the time, Ron figured it was more than enough. I agree, Ron said to Nancy. They went back to the office where Ron filled out the paperwork. He signed a check for the deposit and 6 months' rent and took the keys Marcia handed him. And when do you think she'll move in? Marcia asked. Asked Marcia. Tonight, replied Ron. After she gets home from school. They left the office and walked to Lisa's apartment. When they reached the apartment, she turned to Ron. Are you sure about all this? Asked Lisa. Yes, replied Ron. The sooner she leaves, the better. I just hope you're doing the right thing, she said. It's the only thing I can do, he told her. At least I'm not making her live in my car, which I was sorely tempted to do. I understand, she said. You won't mind if I keep in touch with her, just to make sure she's okay? I don't care, Ron said. She's going to need a job soon. Maybe you can help her with that. I'll see what I can do, Lisa said. I'll talk to you soon, okay? He nodded his head. Lisa put her arm around him. It's going to be okay, little brother. You'll see. Thanks, Lisa, he said. I appreciate it. He walked out and headed to the bank where he made changes to his account. He took Nancy out of the joint account, paid off and canceled their joint credit card, issued a new card in his name only, and got a cashier's check for $5,450 in Nancy's name. It was a pretty expensive day, but he knew it had to be done. After that, he went home and started collecting all of her clothes and toiletries, putting most of them in garbage bags and putting them in the garage next to her scooter, which she still used occasionally. He took down all their pictures and put them in boxes along with their wedding album. As he was packing up Nancy's things, the phone rang. He saw that it was Marcus's number and answered it. Ron, Marcus said, just wanted to let you know that I spoke with the district attorney, and he's very interested in investigating things concerning you and Lisa. Terrific, Ron said. Is there anything we need to do? Not yet, Marcus said. I suspect he'll contact you both and arrange an interview. I just wanted to put you on notice. Thanks a million times, Marcus, Ron said. They finished talking and Ron continued packing until he felt he had done enough. By then, it was almost 3 in the afternoon, and Ron knew that things were about to get interesting. He went down to his lab and checked the videotape from the morning. Judging from the time on the videotape, around 8:30 a.m., Nancy had been joined in the bedroom by her father, John, and George. George had a large bruise on his face where Ron had hit him the day before. What happened to you? Asked Nancy. Your lame husband did this to me yesterday at the hospital, said George. You never told me he was into martial arts. I'm sorry, she said. I guess I forgot to tell you. He started doing it in college. Well, That little bitch will pay dearly, I promise you, he said. No, please, you promised you wouldn't hurt him, she said. I didn't promise shit, he said. Let's see if he's faster than a bullet. You'll end up in jail, she said. And so what the hell? Growled George. He owes me, and by God, he's going to pay. What were you doing at the hospital? She asked. Dad was shot yesterday, Bob said. He died after surgery. Oh my God, Nancy said. Ron didn't say anything about it last night. Did you set the whole thing up? No, Bob said. It was just dumb luck. He got caught between two gangs during a shootout. Just plain luck, John said. Still, it's good for us. Now we get the house and a good chunk of the inheritance. Ron laughed. Yeah, right, asshole, he thought to himself. Nancy turned to George. So when are your buddies going to take Ron? She asked. Probably tomorrow afternoon, after you leave for school. They'll follow him in their van and pick him up the first chance they get, George said. We know a good place by the lake. I wish you wouldn't do that, she said. Well, it will happen, and there's nothing you or anyone else can do about it, said John. Now don't be so brave and all that. Don't say a word about this to anyone, do you hear? Otherwise we'll tell the cops it was your idea. Nancy nodded her head slowly. Ron could see that she was uncomfortable with the whole thing. They left the room, and Nancy began to sob. After a few minutes, she went to the bathroom to shower and get cleaned up for school. After the video was over, Ron checked his vitals and body measurements to compare them to the previous day and was pleased to see that almost nothing had changed since the last time he had checked. He decided not to give himself any more of his potion until morning, when he would surely need it. At that moment, the phone rang. It was his mother. Ron answered, already knowing what she was going to say. Ron, you need to meet me at the hospital, she said. They're taking Dad and the boys away. For what? He asked. Something's wrong with their stuff, she said. Things? Asked Ron. What things? You know, with their, she said. I had to call 911, and they came in an ambulance. I also called Lisa, and she's on her way there too. Can you please meet me at the hospital? Okay, give me a couple minutes, I have an errand to run, he said. Thank you, Ron, she said and hung up. Ron opened the phone book and dialed the number he needed. Police Department, homicide, said the woman who answered. Yes, I'd like to talk to someone about a murder conspiracy, Ron said. 1 minute, please, said the woman. After a minute of electronic music, a male voice came on the line. Homicide, Detective Sparks, the man said. Detective, my name is Ron Black, and I'd like to report a murder conspiracy, Ron said. Tell me what you know, sir, said Detective Sparks. Ron briefly outlined the situation and told everything he had heard from his brothers. Do you know where the perpetrators are now? Detective Sparks asked when Ron had finished. Asked Detective Sparks when Ron had finished. Asked Detective Sparks when Ron had finished. They're on their way to the hospital, said Ron. For all I know, they might even be in surgery. I see, Detective Sparks said. I'm on my way there now, Ron said. Can you or one of your officers meet me there? They're videotaping it, and I can give you a copy. Sure, the detective said. I'll see you there. Ron hung up the phone and laughed, copying the videos onto a flash drive. Locking everything up, he headed for the hospital, bringing his laptop and flash drive with him. He found a parking spot and headed to the emergency room. Once inside, he spoke to the person at the front desk and was directed to the area where the three men were being operated on. He noticed Lisa and his mother talking to a man in a cheap suit. A uniformed police officer was with them. Hi, Mom, Ron said as he approached them. How are Dad and the boys? Not good, she said, crying. They're in surgery right now. The doctor said they're going to have to amputate their... Ron said. Sorry to hear that. The suit looked at Ron. Are you Ron Black? He asked. Ron nodded his head. I am, Ron said. And you must be Detective Sparks. Yes, Ron said. He pointed to a couple of chairs in the waiting area. Would you like to talk about it? Sure, Ron said. His mother spoke up. What's this all about, Ron? She asked. What's going on? Well, Mom, since this is going to affect you too, you should probably know, Ron said. He gestured for Lisa to follow them. When they sat down, Ron pulled out his laptop and plugged in a flash drive. June and Lisa flinched when they saw Nancy with the three men. Okay, Ron said. Listen to this. Ron turned on the video loud enough so that Detective Sparks, his mother, and Lisa could hear what was being said. June saw enough to know what was going on. Ron played the part at the end where George and John laid out the plan. When it was over, he finished the recording, pulled out the disc, and handed it to Detective Sparks. Do you have any idea who their accomplices might be? Asked Detective Sparks. No, sir, I don't, Ron replied. It could be someone they work with or someone they go out drinking with. Sparks looked at June. Did you know anything about this? He asked her. June shook her head. No, Detective, I had no idea, she said. I understand, he said. He looked at Ron again. You didn't see any van on the way here? He asked. No, I didn't, Ron replied. Good. So whatever they're planning to do, it'll probably be in the morning, Ron said. You say your wife is at school right now? Supposedly, Ron said. I see, Sparks said. I'll have to bring her in for questioning. I don't know if the district attorney will want to charge her or not. She doesn't look like a conspirator, but she's still an accessory, albeit ex post facto. He might want to offer her a plea bargain. I don't know. Do what you have to do, Detective, Ron said. I've already started divorce proceedings and was planning on kicking her out of the house tonight. Huh? The detective asked. Do you know where she's planning to stay? Yes, I do, said Ron. He gave the detective the address of the studio apartment he had rented for her that afternoon. Thanks, he said. I'll talk to the district attorney about all this and see how he wants to proceed. In the meantime, I'll ask Officer Green to stay with these three men. I doubt they'll be going anywhere. Mrs. Black will also need to search your home. Please, she said. Do whatever is necessary. While you're at it, Detective, Ron said, could you look for some kind of videotape? What kind of video? The detective asked. Lisa's face turned red as Ron looked at her. Lisa, maybe you should talk to your mom alone so she knows what's going on, suggested Ron. Lisa nodded her head and took her mom's hand. What's going on, Ron? Asked June. Lisa will tell you, said Ron. He turned to the detective again. My attorney told me today that he's spoken to the DA as well, and the DA is interested in pursuing our cases. I have reason to believe that my older sister was molested by the same three men several years ago. They claim to have a videotape and used that threat to keep her quiet. Detective Sparks closed his eyes and sighed heavily. Holy shit, he said quietly. All right, I'll contact the district attorney and see what he has to say. In the meantime, I'll send some officers to your neighborhood. If we see a van near your house, we'll deal with it. Are you going to be okay on your own? I'll be fine, Detective, Ron said. At that moment, they heard crying coming from the hallway. Looking up, they saw June bent over, covering her mouth with her hand. She knows, Ron thought. Good girl, Lisa, he said to himself. Detective Sparks looked at Ron. You take care of them, he said. I'll take care of the other three. Ron nodded his head. Thank you, Detective, I will, Ron said. Detective Sparks talked to Officer Green, then walked over to June and Lisa. After talking to them for a few minutes, he walked out with a nod to Ron and a wave. After about an hour or so, the doctor came out of the surgery room and approached June and Lisa. Ron joined them as they walked to one of the private conference rooms. We've finished the surgery on your husband and two sons, Dr. June said. They are now in the ICU and will probably be there for about an hour. After that, they will be taken to their rooms. For your information, they can still urinate, but they will not be able to have sexual intercourse. Do you know what they may have been doing to cause this? They were with my wife hours before they called 911, Ron said. The doctor looked at him and nodded his head. When was the last time you did this with her? He asked. Maybe a day or two before it happened, Ron replied. I've never heard of sexual activity causing anything like this, but you should probably get tested for STDs anyway, the doctor said. If you'd like, we can do it here. I think that would be a good idea, Ron said. No. The nurse will let you know which rooms they will be in, the doctor said as he was about to leave. We will contact you if there are any complications. Thank you, doctor, June said. As the doctor left the room, Ron saw a nurse walk up to him. Ron listened as they talked quietly. He only made out scraps of conversation, but clearly heard the doctor ask, 4 more? Like the first 3? He distinctly heard the nurse reply, yes, like those 3. They're in the operating room now. Ron smiled to himself. An hour later, Ron, June, and Lisa were escorted to the 2 adjoining rooms where Bob, George, and John were now resting. As they entered the first room where George and Bob were, they saw Officer Green sitting in the hallway between the doors. They also noticed handcuffs on both men. A nurse was checking the monitors hooked up to both men. June, began George, but she interrupted him. Shut up, asshole, she said, shocking the nurse. I've seen the video, and I'm going to make sure all 3 of you go to jail for what you plan to do to Ron, you miserable pieces of shit. And by the way, I'm divorcing you. I should have done it a long time ago. She looked at George. And you. I should have had an abortion when I had the chance. You make me sick. You're dead to me. All 3 of you are dead to me, and I don't want to see you again as long as I live. Mom, please, George began. This is all his fault, he added, pointing at Ron. Bullshit, she said. Remember, I saw the video. I watched you. I heard what you were planning to do to your own brother. You're not my son anymore, and I hope they give you the death penalty. She turned on her heel and left the room to give a similar speech to John. Ron smiled as he looked at the 2 men in their beds. So, he said, you were going to destroy me. How did you manage that? Yeah, so what? Growled George through the pain. I told you a long time ago that I was going to make you pay. Yeah, so what are you going to do about it, Mudblood? Asked George. We're not going to be in jail forever, asshole. Mark my words. When we get out, I'll hunt you down too. Shut up, George, said Bob. No, let him talk, Ron said. I want to hear how he plans to do it. It's going to be a surprise, George hissed. You'll never see me coming, you lame asshole! Ron laughed. Ron nodded his head and turned to George, pulling an audio recorder out of his pocket. He pressed a couple buttons, and everyone heard George's recorded confession. So, asshole, Ron said. The 3 of us heard your confession, and I recorded the whole thing. I'll make sure the prosecutor gets it. From what I understand, people like you don't do too well in prison. Officer Green and the nurse chuckled. Have a good day, Ron said as he headed out the door. As he entered John's room, he saw that his older brother was chained to the bed, as were George and Bob. Ron walked over to John with a smile on his face. By the way, asshole, Ron said, your asshole brother confessed to your crimes. There were 3 witnesses, and I wrote it all down for the prosecutor. I just wanted you to know. I'm sure Bubba will take care of it when you're in jail. He chuckled as John's face turned green. Ron didn't say anything but turned and walked away, June and Lisa joining him. They walked into the hospital coffee shop and sat at a table while Ron bought them lattes. June looked like she was about to cry. What's going to happen to me, Ron? She asked through her tears. I have no income, no job, no skills, nothing. We're going to lose the house and everything else. We'll get to that in a minute, Mom, Ron said. I want to hear something from you first. What's that? She asked through her tears. Did you ever really love me as a child? He asked. She looked at him in surprise and blinked. Of course I did, Ron, she said. And I still do. You're my son. You know that. No, Mom, I don't, he said. You scolded me as a child, always telling me I had to be just like the other boys. Sure, you never bullied me or were as cold and hard as Dad and the boys, but I don't remember you ever telling me you loved me. When I was in college, you didn't even send me a Christmas or birthday card. Why? I'm sorry, Ron, she said. It was all because of your father. He was so bossy, and they were always jealous of you. He was afraid you'd turn into a mama's boy. After you left, and he lost his job, it only got worse. Did you know Grandpa bought a mortgage on your house? He asked. She shook her head. No, I didn't know, she said. Your father took care of all that, and I was never allowed to see any statements. I don't even know how to pay bills or write a check. He'd give me cash to buy groceries, and that was it. Sometimes he'd give me a few extra dollars for clothes or a haircut. Ron looked at Lisa and saw that she nodded her head slightly. Well, Grandpa put your house in trust, and Daddy paid a little rent every month, Ron said. That's the only reason you never lost the house. Grandpa put Lisa and I in charge of the trust, so we can do whatever we want with it. I don't mind you staying there as long as you want, and I think Lisa agrees with me. I agree, Lisa said. Ron nodded his head. We've also talked about setting up a fund for you so you can take care of yourself, he said. Lisa and I will help you get back on your feet and show you how to pay your bills if you want to. Hell, I'll even pay for your divorce. Grandpa's lawyer is handling mine, and I'm sure he'll take care of yours too. June looked at Ron, her eyes brimming with tears. You'd do all this for me? She asked. Even after everything that's happened? Yes, Mom, Ron said. I would. June burst into tears. Lisa hugged June, tears streaming from her eyes. Grandpa once told me that justice must be tempered with mercy. June looked up at him. You're a lot like your grandfather, she said. Ron smiled. Thank you, he said. I like to think so. I'm talking about my father, she said. You never met him. He died before you were born. You even look a lot like him. I think you would have liked him. He and your father never got along. They fought all the time. Maybe that's why your father never liked you. You reminded him too much of my father. That seemed reasonable to Ron. Calming down, June looked at Ron. So, what are you going to do about Nancy? She asked. I've started divorce proceedings and I'm kicking her out of the house tonight, Ron said. I'm assuming she's not in jail. I don't blame you, she said. I'm sorry about what happened, Ron. I love you. You'll always be my baby. Ron smiled. I love you too, Mom, he said. They got up from the table. Can you ever forgive me? Asked June. Ron wrapped his arms around her. Of course I forgive you, he said, and she hugged him tightly for a few minutes. I have to go home, June said when they were done hugging. I'm a mess. June and Lisa hugged for a few more minutes. When June left, Lisa looked at Ron. You did such a nice thing, Ron, she said. Thank you. Ron looked at her again before giving her a hug. Anytime, he said. What she said makes sense to me. I guess since Dad isn't working, I'll have to take care of Grandpa's funeral arrangements. I'll help you with that, she said. Thanks, he said. I'll need all the help I can get. He glanced at his watch. I guess I'd better get home and get ready to meet Nancy. Okay, she said. Let me know how it goes. Call me if you need anything. Part 3. Ron got home and changed into shorts and a t-shirt. He set his laptop on the table along with his briefcase. He hadn't expected Nancy to be home until midnight or later, and was surprised to hear the garage door open around 11:30. You're home early, he said as she entered the house. It was a really bad day, she said. I just finished talking to the police. Some detective kept asking me about a plot to destroy you. Interesting, Ron said. I'm going to go upstairs and take a shower and then go to bed, she said. No, I guess not, he said. Look, I've had a really bad day, she said. And it's about to get worse, he said. Sit down. I want to take a shower first, she said. I said sit down, yelled Ron. Right now. She stared at him, shocked. Slowly, she pulled up a chair across from him and sat down. I have something I want you to watch, he said, showing a video of her having fun with his father. Her eyes widened as she watched the video. "Oh God, no, please," she whispered. "Look," he said. "That's it. There's more, including a video of the four of you plotting to destroy me." "Please, Ron, I didn't mean to do that," she said. "What, destroy me?" said Ron, his anger rising to the surface. "No," she said. "Bullshit, bitch," he said. "You divorced them the day we got married. Don't deny it." "I was naive then, but not anymore." "How often did you do it with them?" "I don't know," she replied. "Mostly on weekdays after you left for work." "The whole time we were married?" he asked. "Most of the last year," she replied. "But I didn't want to hurt you. They said they had a video of me and they'd give it to you if I didn't screw them over." "A video of what?" he asked. "A video of what happened on our wedding day," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "What about all the men? Like the last meeting of my company? How many men have you entertained since we got married?" She lowered her eyes, feeling ashamed. "I don't know," she said. "Maybe a few." "Several?" asked Ron. "What, are we talking about 5, 10, 50, about a couple hundred?" "God, no," she said. "Well, I have video that shows you had at least 12 men in one day," he said. "What, you think I'm paying for your tuition so you can have fun with every guy on campus?" "I'm not stupid, Nancy. Counting your 3 morning buddies, that's 15 men in one day. Do the math. That's 75 in a school week." "I'm sorry," she said. "I just needed that to get me through homework. It's just sex. I didn't take anything away from you." "Just sex? Never took anything from me?" asked Ron. "Are you kidding me? I also noticed that you never used protection. Were you trying to pick up some kind of contagion to bring home to me or something? What the hell is wrong with you?" Her tears had dried up and her demeanor had changed considerably. Now she looked angry. "Okay," she said defiantly. "I admit it. I like that. Okay? Up until now, I've been faking it when I've been with you. God, you're so damn naive. I only married you to get out of the hole I was living in. You know where I've been for the last 3 hours? I've been at the club. And don't even think about getting a divorce. So I'm going to keep cheating on you. Maybe I'll even do it in front of you." "You stupid slut," Ron said. At those words, her eyes widened. "Yeah, maybe I was naive and a little wimpy once, but that Ron is gone and he's never coming back. Trust me, bitch. Did the police tell you about my father and brothers?" "No, they didn't," she replied. "Well, they lost something," he said. "What?" she asked, shocked. "Yes," he said. "There's no telling what diseases you already have in you. When this becomes known, I don't think there will be a man in the country brave enough to want to touch you." "What have you done to me?" she asked. "Nothing," he lied. "It's all on your conscience. And now you're paying for it. As for the divorce, I've already met with the lawyer and he's preparing the papers. Remember that little prenup you signed a couple years ago? It's now in effect. All your bank cards are canceled and all your trash is packed away." He placed a key on the table with a tag that had an address on it. "This is the key to your new apartment. The address is on the tag. You're out of here," he said. He put a cashier's check on the table. "This is what you get under the prenup. Spend it wisely. You should probably get a job. Your tuition's already paid for, and my lawyer has your new address. You can keep your car and scooter. Your phone will be disconnected at the end of the month. Don't fight the divorce, or you could be the next internet sensation." "You wouldn't dare," she exclaimed. "Why the hell not?" he asked. "You said so yourself." He grabbed her hand and ripped off her wedding and engagement ring. Grabbing her purse, he removed her house key and took her bank cards out of her wallet. He handed her purse back to her. "Now get out of my house, whore," he said. She stepped back, shocked. She'd never heard him talk to her like that. She'd always thought he was just obeying her. "Please," she said, and a tear rolled down her cheek. "I didn't mean everything I said. I'm sorry. I'll never do that again. I really love you." He laughed in her face. You think I'm stupid enough to fall for that shit? He asked. Screw you. Oh, wait. Everyone in town already bought it. By the way, why aren't you in jail right now? The DA offered me immunity if I testified against your father and brothers, she said. I'm really sorry, Ron. Can't we at least stay friends? I really didn't mean to hurt you. Friends? You think I want to be friends with a man who lied to me and plotted to destroy me? He asked. I was just a damn food stamp to you. My God, you're even stupider than I thought. Now I hate you to the core. And I don't ever want to see your stupid face again. Do you understand? Or do I need to draw a picture for you with a crayon? No, I get it, she said quietly. Can I at least come to your grandfather's funeral? Provided you stay away from me, he said. Now put your shit in the car and get the hell out. Now! She turned and headed for the door leading out to the garage. He could hear her struggling to stuff everything into the car. After she left, he went out and changed the code on the garage door to keep her out. After securing the house, he went to his lab. After what Nancy had told him, he realized that the CDC was likely to get involved, and he wanted there to be no trace left of what he had created. He knew the toxin would be eliminated from her system 24 hours after administration, so he wasn't too worried about it showing up in a blood or urine test. He burned off the serum residue and sterilized all his equipment to remove all traces. Having finished his work, he went to bed. Early in the morning, he heard the doorbell ring. Going downstairs in his bathrobe, he looked through the peephole and saw 3 men in dark suits. He opened the door, and they all flashed their badges. Dr. Black? One of them asked. With 2 doctorates, Ron had the right to be addressed that way, but he rarely used it and preferred to be called by his first name. Yes, replied Ron. Gordon Sullivan, CDC. I'm here to see your wife, Nancy. Is she here? He asked. Ron shook his head. No, she doesn't live here anymore, he said. What does that mean? We need to talk to her alone, Ryan said. Like I said, she doesn't live here anymore, Ron said. Do you want her address? Yes, we would, Gordon replied. Ron gave them the address of her apartment and watched them leave. Ron was relieved that they didn't want to search his house, but he thought about the fact that they might come back. Ron looked both ways to see a van that might belong to the brothers' accomplices, but saw none. He turned on the TV and made himself a cup of coffee. Back in his room, he heard the local news being broadcast. Local medical authorities report that about 40 men have had to undergo emergency surgery in the last 18 hours, the announcer said. The scene switched to a doctor talking to reporters. It's been a long night at the medical center. Because of the nature of this outbreak, we had to bring in the CDC, the doctor said. We're not sure how far it has spread and we're very concerned. The scene switched to the anchor. Investigators say about 30 men have admitted to having a relationship with the same woman. At the time of this report, medical services are searching for her. Due to confidentiality rules, the names of those involved are not being released, the anchor said. Ron laughed. 40 people, huh? The bitch was busy, that was for sure. Ron couldn't help but wonder how many of them were married. Ron figured it wouldn't be long now. A few minutes later, the phone rang. It was Lisa. Good morning, she said when he answered. Did you see the news? Yeah, I saw it, Ron said. 40 people? I'm sure that raised a ruckus for a long time. Lisa laughed. I'm sure it did, she said. By the way, I had to take Nancy to the ER early this morning. Oh, Ron said. What happened? She complained that her mouth and the back of her body were burning really badly, Lisa said. I thought someone had set her butt on fire, and I saw some lesions on her tongue and in her mouth. When we got to the hospital, she was complaining of severe heartburn. Doesn't look good. Did you do anything to her last night? Other than kicking her out of the house, no, Ron said. I never touched her. Is she still in the hospital? Yes, Lisa replied. Probably going to be there for a day or two. Well, the CDC came here looking for her. She was called by a group of men who were at the hospital. I sent them to her new apartment, he said. They'll find her, Lisa said. Her admission should alert you if the CDC is involved. I'll keep you posted. Thanks, Ron said. Finishing the conversation, he burst into laughter. Of course, he hadn't thought it could happen, but he was pleased to know that she would feel some heat, pun intended, from her own activities. Still, he was a little concerned that he'd overlooked it when he'd created the formula, and wondered if the potion he'd used on himself had clouded his thoughts. It wasn't like him to miss details like that. Perhaps the anger and shock of the situation had gotten to him, he thought to himself. Looking out the window, he noticed a blue Ford van parked across the street from his house. There were police cars parked around it, and he saw the officers leading 3 very large handcuffed men towards them. One was black, one was white, and the third appeared to be Hispanic. He did not recognize any of them. After the men were placed in 2 cars, the officer walked to his front door and rang the bell. Good morning, officer, Ron said as he opened the door. What can I do for you? Good morning, Mr. Black, the officer said. Detective Sparks asked me to let you know when we'll be taking the suspects into custody. We'll be patrolling your neighborhood heavily over the next day to make sure you're okay. Thank you, officer, Ron said. I appreciate that. I have some audio recordings that I think Detective Sparks might be interested in. Is it okay if I give them to him today? I think so, the officer said. He's pretty busy right now, so you might want to call him first, so he'll be expecting you. I will, thank you, Ron said. Have a good day, sir, the officer said before leaving. Ron closed the door, feeling relieved that they had caught the 3 men. He got dressed and walked over to the van where another officer was busy cataloging evidence. The 2 cars with the suspects had already left. Good morning, sir, the officer said as Ron approached him. Are you Mr. Black? Yes, Ron said. I can't tell you how glad I am that you caught those guys. I can imagine how relieved you'll be, the officer said. So, what do you have here? Asked Ron. He saw the gun and a few other items already packed in labeled plastic bags. I'll let you get back to your work, officer. Thanks again. You're welcome, Ron said. Have a good day. Damn, he thought to himself. These 3 assholes were serious about destroying him. Calling the police station, he threw them an audio tape of the assholes' confessions. I think we got them all down, Detective Sparks said. I'm getting ready to question the 3 suspects we caught this morning. We've got some pretty solid evidence on them, too. Turns out they're repeat offenders, and this is their 3rd offense. The rest of the day passed in a blur as Ron made arrangements for Mark's funeral. The service would be held in a couple of days, and, as he had learned, his grandfather had thoughtfully paid in advance for his funeral and the burial plot, which was next to his grandmother's. The headstone was already in place, but Mark's date of death needed to be added to it. He contacted the cemetery and made the necessary arrangements. He also found Mark's old DD-214 form indicating that he was a Vietnam War veteran. He contacted the war veteran and, after being fobbed off to various authorities, was able to make funeral arrangements. The flag had already been ordered, and Ron learned his grandfather had asked that it be given to him. Ron's eyes glazed over when he found out. The staff at the funeral home were very kind and told Ron that all the arrangements had already been made. One of the staff even wrote a very nice obituary and included the names of Mark's descendants after receiving Ron's information. Your grandfather was highly respected in the community, Mr. Black, the funeral director said. I wouldn't be surprised to see quite a few famous people here. With that done, Ron returned home and relaxed, informing Lisa of what he had done. I saw Nancy today, she said. She had to have several surgeries on her face and rectum. She's in very bad shape right now. Yeah, but she brought it on herself, he said. Ron, she's still your wife, Lisa said. Not for long, Ron said. No one forced her to do what she did. You didn't hear what she said to me last night. I have no love for her. Please, Ron, she said. I don't expect you to take her back, but please don't let her actions harden your heart. I don't have any feelings for her right now, Ron said. Just don't let her turn you into a monster, she told him. By the way, she added a few moments later. I made an appointment for Mom to see Marcus. I'll take her tomorrow morning. Thanks, Lisa, he said. Tell Marcus I'll pay for her divorce. I will, Ron, she said. I also told him that Nancy will be in the hospital for a while. He'll have her service there. They finished talking and Ron took a bite to eat. He didn't care at all what happened to Nancy, but Lisa noticed something that bothered him too. Was he turning into a monster? Ron hoped not, but he also knew that the old Ron was gone forever. He ended up going down to his lab, checking his vitals and body mass. The results pleased him. Perhaps he had finally picked up the right formula. That evening, he decided not to give himself another dose and instead changed into workout clothes. He found that the physical activity increasingly calmed him down and helped him think clearly. Mark's funeral was held a couple days later and went well. According to the funeral director, several famous people came to pay their respects, including a retired U.S. senator and several members of the House of Representatives. They all shook Ron's hand and expressed their condolences. Ron gave a touching eulogy and thanked everyone for coming. Afterward, they went to the cemetery for the funeral service. Ron decided he was the last to leave, so he sat down at Mark's grave. Overwhelmed with grief, he began to sob. Mark was more than just his grandfather. He was Ron's best friend and confidant. Mark had always supported him, even when no one else could. Ron felt a hand on his shoulder and looked up to see Lisa with tears streaming down her face. I miss him too, she said. He nodded his head. For a long time, he was the only real family I had, Ron said. Sometimes I wonder what I'll do without him. I know, Ron, she said quietly. But he's never really gone, you know that. As long as you remember him, he'll always be in your heart. And I promise I'll always be there for you. Thank you, Lisa, Ron said. That means a lot. How's Mom holding up? Ron had spent time with her earlier and hugged her while she mourned. But he had been very busy at the ceremony and hadn't been able to spend as much time with her and Lisa as he would have liked. She's sad, but I think she'll be okay, Lisa said. Marcus filed papers for his father, and he'll either be in the hospital or in jail. They plan to pick up all three of them in the next few days. Nancy said she wanted to be here, but I haven't seen her, he said. Well, she's recovering, but the CDC is keeping her in isolation right now, Lisa said. They won't let her have any contact with anyone for now. I guess that's a smart move, Ron said. He glanced at his watch. I really have to go, he said. I'd like to get a good night's sleep. The last few days have knocked me out a lot. Okay, she said. Don't be a stranger. I'd like to take you and Mom out to dinner this weekend, if that's okay. Sounds good, he said before they left. As they walked to their cars, Detective Sparks approached them. I just wanted to give you my condolences and bring you up to speed, he said as he shook Ron's hand. I appreciate that, Detective, Ron said. What's new? Well, the three suspects we picked up are singing like canaries, Detective Sparks said. Turns out they're three-time losers, and this case could put them away for life. The guns they had were stolen. So the case is closed? Asked Ron. Pretty much, yes, said Sparks. And the tape of their confession confirms it. What about Lisa's case? Asked Ron. As far as I know, the SWAT team has enough evidence to put all three of them behind bars for a very long time, said the cop. Believe me, they'll be old and gray by the time they get out into the free air. I hope you're right, Ron said. Believe me, it makes the DA drool, Sparks said. Of course, it helps that it's an election year, and he wants to be known as the man who's tough on criminals. Of course, Ron said. They said goodbye and left the cemetery. The next day at work, his boss approached him. Ron, there's a man from the CDC here to see you, he said. He's waiting for you in conference room #3. Thank you, Ron said. He cleaned himself up and followed his boss out of the lab. Can you tell me what this is about? His boss asked him. Not right now, said Ron. I'll tell you later. Okay, said his boss. Just don't take too long to answer. I won't, Ron promised. Gordon stood up as Ron entered the conference room. Dr. Black, Gordon said. It's good to see you again. Please call me Ron, Ron said as he shook Gordon's hand. What brings you here? I wanted to talk to you about your wife's case, Ron said. I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of checking up on you. And, asked Ron. I know everything about you, said Gordon. IQ 215, member of Mensa, 2 doctorates from MIT, self-made multimillionaire. Quite impressive for a man of your young age. You're highly regarded by all your colleagues. I understand you have a laboratory at home. Some guys work on cars, others have a man cave, Ron said. And I like to do my own research. Mostly theoretical, all in compliance with OSHA regulations and standards. What does all this have to do with my wife's business? Well, we have her in isolation right now, Gordon said. She's recovering from her surgeries, and we've started running tests. So far, we haven't found anything that would explain what happened. I was wondering if you could help shed some light on what happened. Ron shook his head. I don't see how I can help you, he said to Gordon. We're certainly concerned about the public at large, Gordon said. If we can understand what happened to your wife, perhaps we can help prevent it from happening again. I see, Ron said. Maybe you'd be better off spending our tax dollars on commercials, warning about the dangers of infidelity. Gordon grinned at that. Perhaps you're right, he said. Perhaps we'll think about it. But what worries me is what could happen if this, whatever it is, spreads. Every person in America could be in danger. Ron nodded his head understandingly. I see your point, Ron said. How many more cases have been reported? None so far, Gordon said. But that doesn't mean anything yet. And how long do you plan to keep her in isolation? Asked Ron. As long as it takes, said Gordon. We need to know what happened, and we can't risk another outbreak. My superiors agree. We've filed paperwork with the court to keep her for as long as it takes. It could take months to find out, Ron said. Or years, Gordon replied. Ron smiled to himself. The thought of Nancy being isolated for years without physical contact with her lovers would be a nice icing on the cake. So what do you want from me? Asked Ron. Well, as I said, Ron began, nothing showed up in her initial tests. We'll run additional tests, of course. Of course, said Ron. Would you mind taking a look at our results? Asked Ron. Maybe you can help point us in the right direction. You want me to work as a consultant? Asked Ron. Is that it? Something like that, said Gordon. It's unlike anything we've seen before. I'm sure it is, said Ron. You realize I already have a job and I'm very busy right now. You'll have to run it through my managers. Already done, Gordon said, pulling an envelope out of his pocket. He handed it to Ron, who looked at the letter signed by the CEO. According to the letter, Ron was authorized and instructed to consult for the CDC on a part-time basis for no more than 3 months. The letter further stated that he would be compensated by the company and the government for his cooperation. So I guess it's a done deal, Ron said, looking at Gordon. Ron began to wonder if Gordon suspected him and was setting him up for something. Yes, he is, Gordon said. Good, Ron said. But I'd like to ask a couple things first. Sure, go ahead and ask, Gordon said. First, you know I'm divorcing Nancy, right? Wouldn't that be considered a conflict of interest? Asked Ron. I guess so, said Gordon. But I know you're too professional to let that happen. Right? I guess so, said Ron. Secondly, you know I'm not authorized to give a medical opinion on anything. I'm not a doctor, after all. Hell, I'm not even certified to draw blood, even though I know how to do it. I know, Gordon said. But you're the best at analyzing test results, from what I've been told, and you'll have minimal patient contact. Okay, Ron said. All right, I agree. But remember, this is only part-time and only for 3 months. After that, you'll be on your own. My job comes first here. I understand, Gordon said. So I'll see you tomorrow afternoon? Yes, Ron said. I want her to have a full workup. Blood chemistry, urinalysis, DNA, everything. okay? We can start all that this afternoon, Gordon said. The DNA may take a day or two, but we'll do it first thing. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your help. Like you, Gordon, I don't want this to happen to anyone else, Ron said. They shook hands, and Ron watched Gordon leave the room. Although Ron feared that Gordon might be trying to trap him, he wanted to find out for himself if his decision had caused Nancy any long-term harm, and this was the best way to do it. Theoretically, he shouldn't have done it, but he had no other way to find out for sure. He sought out his supervisor, showed him the letter, and told him what had happened. Oh, well, his supervisor said. It's only for 3 months, and if nothing else, it will make the company look better in the eyes of the CDC. Keep me posted if you want, and make sure it doesn't interfere with your other projects. Will do, boss, Ron said. That night, Ron sat in his lab and mentally went over in his head the formula he had applied to Nancy. Nothing was written down on paper, so he relied on his photographic memory. As far as he could tell, there should be no ill effects from the solution. The following afternoon, he was fitted with a special self-contained suit designed to shield him from direct contact with Nancy. After putting it on, Gordon led him into her room. Ron looked at her and noticed the bandages on her face. She didn't recognize him at first, but her eyes widened when she realized who it was in the suit. Mrs. Black, Gordon began. We've brought in a counselor to help us determine what happened. Please cooperate fully with him. Ron? She asked weakly. Her soon-to-be ex-husband looked at her over the visor of his suit. Call me Dr. Black, he told her in a calm tone. I'm sorry about the way things turned out, she said. I'm not here to apologize, he said. You made your position clear last night, and you got my response. I'm here to help the CDC figure out what you did to all those people. He looked at Gordon. Has she been tested for STDs yet? He asked. Yes, Gordon replied. She's been diagnosed with gonorrhea and chlamydia. We won't know about HIV until sometime later. She was prescribed treatment for those infections before the surgery. I see, Ron said. And do you have the results I asked for? Everything but the DNA, Gordon said. It should be here in a couple days. I rushed that one. Very good, Ron said. You know these STDs will affect the test results. We'll need another full test in a couple weeks or so. He looked at Nancy again and handed her a thick notepad and pen. I need you to list the names of all the men you've had contact with in the last year, he told her. I realize you may not know them all, but you need to list as many as you can. List the ones you've had contact with more than once. If you don't know their names, list the number of unknown men and give all the details you can. Basically, we need a complete diary of your activities, or as complete as you can make it. Is that necessary? She asked. Yes, he said. The sooner you start, the better. She nodded her head. When can I go home? She asked. I don't know, Ron told her. The CDC is concerned that your illness might spread. In short, you could be the latest Typhoid Mary, a carrier of something that puts everyone else at risk. Oh my God, she said. What have I done? He smiled. Well, besides ruining our marriage and my love, 40 men have lost the ability to ever do it again, Ron said. I'm sorry, she said, as tears came to her eyes. So you said, Ron turned to her. He turned to Gordon. I'll need to take the test results to my lab for analysis. I'll let you know the results as soon as possible. Wait, you're taking them with you? Asked Gordon. Of course, said Ron. I can't analyze them here. But we have protocols, Gordon began. And I have mine, Ron told him firmly. Look, you needed my help, right? You came to me, remember? If you want my help, you'll put your protocols aside for a while and let me do my job. If not, tell me now, and I'll let my superiors know I'm done with it. All right, Ron, Gordon said. I suppose under the circumstances we can waive the rules. Let me know what you find as soon as possible, okay? I will, Ron said. He picked up the folder and headed home. After eating, he went to his lab and started going over the test results, typing them into the computer. Ron scrutinized them and didn't like what he saw. There didn't seem to be anything that could have been caused by his decision, but there was something else, and it bothered him. He needed more information, so he pulled out his phone and called Gordon. "That was fast," Gordon said. "I'm not done yet," Ron said. "I need some samples. Can you do that?" "Sure, Ron," said Gordon. "What's going on?" "I'm not sure yet, but I need to do it right away," Ron said. "You got it," Gordon said. "I'll do it right now." "Good," Ron said. "Text me when you're done." 2 hours later, Ron received a message from Gordon that the samples were ready and he could pick them up. Ron texted back, locked the lab, and walked out. "Here you go," Gordon said, holding out a plastic container of samples to him. "What did you find?" "I'm not sure yet," Ron said. "I'll let you know." He went back to his lab and began analyzing. After a few hours, he sat down and double-checked his findings. If he was right, he was facing a super gonorrhea that had never been discovered before, and no drug could cure it. He had heard of one case where a man had contracted something similar in Southeast Asia and wondered if any of Nancy's lovers had been there. A couple weeks later, he approached Gordon and showed him what he'd found. "Are you sure about this?" asked Gordon. "Absolutely," Ron replied. Gordon shook his head. "And what do you suggest we do?" said Gordon. "We'll have to develop a cure for it, but I can tell you it could take several years from what I've discovered," said Ron. "I've talked to my colleagues in the lab, and they all agree with my assessment. That's not all. In the biopsy you took, I found what looks like precancerous cells. If my calculations are correct, and they almost always are, Nancy could get cervical cancer in the next couple years." "Do you think this new bacteria caused the outbreak?" asked Gordon. "Honestly, I don't know," said Ron. "Possibly, since it seems to be living off her tissues." "What do you suggest we do?" asked Gordon. "In my opinion, she should be kept in isolation," said Ron. "At least until we develop something to treat the STD." "I agree," Gordon said. "Let me report this to my superiors and get into action. Would you like to break the news to her?" "Sure," Ron said. "I'll tell her now. There's no point in waiting." He got dressed and went to her room. She looked up at him as he sat down next to her. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Terrible," she replied weakly. "My throat hurts. It hurts to pee, and something is leaking out of me. What's the matter with me?" "You've contracted a form of gonorrhea we've never seen before," Ron said. "It seems to have mutated. We can slow its growth, but there's no cure for it right now." "Oh my God," she said, crying. "What have I done?" "You've had fun with the wrong men," he said calmly. "You know, maybe some of the men you've been having fun with are from Southeast Asia or have been to Southeast Asia recently?" She shook her head. "No, I didn't interview them before I entertained them," she said. "What's going to happen now?" "Well," Ron said, "it looks like you'll be kept in isolation until we come up with a cure. You can't be touched at all." "And how long will that take?" she asked. Ron shrugged. "No one knows," he said. "It could take years." "Years?" she exclaimed. "I can't do that. I have classes, things to do." "I think your college years are over," Ron said. She shook her head. "No, I can't do that," she said. "There's more to it," Ron said. "More? Wonderful," she said wryly. "What?" "If I'm right, and you know I'm almost always right, you'll have cancer in a few years," he said. She began to sob. "I can't stand not being able to touch anyone. All I do is lie here and watch TV. They won't let me touch anything until I put on gloves." At that moment, Gordon appeared in the doorway, dressed in his hazmat suit. "You will be in a safe place where you will be well taken care of," he said. "That's the only thing we can do. Now that we know what's going on, we'll be able to keep a close eye on you. And if, as Dr. Black says, you do have cancer, we'll be able to detect it early and deal with it." "What about all my stuff?" she asked. "You'll be living in a one-bedroom apartment with all the amenities," Gordon said. "Of course you won't be able to have guests anyway, but it's much more comfortable than here. If you want, we can take your things there. Of course, you won't need a car or anything like that, and clothes will be provided for you. And, Ron said, I happen to know that the remaining classes can be taken online. You may have to retake some of the classes because of lost time. If you'd like, I can arrange that. Please do so, she said, if it's not too difficult. No problem, Ron said. She looked at him with tears in her eyes. By this time, Gordon had left the room and they could talk in private. I'm sorry, she said. Ron nodded his head. I know, Ron said. Will I ever be able to live a normal life again? She asked. I don't know, Ron said. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. All you can do is live one day at a time. If it's any consolation, I'm not sure I'll ever have what you call a normal life again. It's just the way things are. You know, if you'd just been faithful to me, you wouldn't be in this situation. I know, she said. So tell me why, he asked. Why did you cheat on me the day we got married? Why did you keep cheating? Your father was very assertive, she said. Later they came to me and said they had pictures and videos and they would show them to you if I didn't do what they wanted. At first I hated it, but as time went on, I started to like it more and more. It became a kind of game. You know the rest. Did you mean all that stuff you said last night? He asked. At the time, yes, she said. But I didn't really mean all of it. At that moment, I just wanted to lash out at you. I'm sorry. You already said that, Ron told her. Does that mean you're going to get a divorce? She asked. Oh, hell yes, it does, he said. She nodded her head in understanding. I understand, she said. Are we ever going to see each other again? I doubt it, he said, standing up. I'll take care of your things and your classes. I'll keep an eye on your progress, but don't expect to see or hear from me again. Goodbye, Nancy. I loved you once. I'm sorry you had to go and ruin it. Goodbye, Ron, Dr. Black, she said. He smiled and left the room. Gordon met him at the entrance to the room. Are you okay, Ron? He asked. Yes, I'm perfectly fine, Ron said. I'll let you know when we get her settled, Gordon said. I understand your company will be leading the development of a treatment for this disease. I've also been told that you will be leading it. Good luck. Thank you, Ron said as he walked out. As he drove home, he thought about what had just happened. As far as Nancy was concerned, she was out of his life and would never be able to live a normal life again as a result of her actions. Epilogue. The divorce went smoothly, especially after the judge found out that Nancy was the same woman whose cheating had caused 40 men to suffer. The criminal cases against Bob, George, and John went through the entire court system, but they were eventually found guilty on all charges and received sentences ranging from 35 years to life in prison. Things were not going well for George and John, and one morning they were found dead. Bob later suffered the same fate. June's divorce also took place and was finalized by the time Bob went to prison. Ron and Lisa set up a trust fund for her and taught her how to handle her own finances. 6 months after the divorce, Lisa introduced her to a single doctor, a couple years older than her, and they began dating. A year later, they were married. Take care of my mom, Ron warned her at the wedding with a smile. Oh, I will, he said. I promise you that. Because of the sheer size of Mark's estate, the probate took almost a year to complete. But when it was finalized, both Ron and Lisa found themselves the beneficiaries of a huge sum of money. They still hadn't decided what to do with all the real estate, but agreed to sell the house they grew up in after their mother remarried. Lisa finally married the right mister, who turned out to be a nurse at the hospital where she worked. Ron walked her down the aisle. At his insistence, she and her new husband moved into Mark's old house. Ron continued to work on his personal formula and declared it ready for use about 6 months after his divorce from Nancy. Ron went through all the legal loopholes to make sure the company couldn't clean up the profits and got busy finding the right customers. He was still wary of releasing the drug to the general public, but he found a company that maintained a special camp for men in northern Idaho. After much negotiation with the owners, He toured the camp and observed its operation. He was sold when he witnessed a bitch-burning ceremony in which an effigy of a cheating wife was burned. He signed an exclusive contract with the company, hoping his formula would help men who were once like him. He never saw Nancy again, but was aware of her condition. She continued her online classes and finally graduated after 18 months. She wrote Ron several times, but gave up after he refused to respond. As predicted, 2 years after his examination, she developed cervical cancer. She ended up having a radical hysterectomy, followed by chemotherapy and radiation therapy. She nearly died several times during her treatment, but a little over a year and a half after her diagnosis, she was declared an official cancer survivor. Becoming like her old self, she struggled to get through each day, but gradually regained her strength. She continued to be treated for her mutated gonorrhea, but it seems most of it was destroyed with surgery and radiation. 2 years after her cancer treatment, a formula was found to treat a new strain of gonorrhea. A year later, it was approved by the FDA. A year after his divorce from Nancy, Ron attended a Star Trek convention held in his town. He decided to dress up as a Klingon just for fun. There, he met a charming, red-headed girl named Belinda, who was also dressed as a Klingon. They spent the rest of the convention together and started dating. It turned out that she had just divorced a cheating man who had abused her. Like him, she had a genius IQ and was a member of Mensa. She also worked as a researcher, but for an aerospace company. She said she was now looking for a man with brains and brawn. He shared his story and said he was looking for a smart woman who knew how to be faithful. They spent many evenings together playing mind games and talking in Klingon. Ron was happier than ever with Nancy, and they fell in love. One evening, Ron proposed to her and was surprised when she not only accepted, but demanded that he make her his woman that same evening. The end. If you haven't watched the first part of this video, the link will be in the description. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.